Sudan, one of Africa's largest countries overlooking the Red Sea, has yet again been plunged into a virtual civil war with two generals, once close associates, locked in bloody clashes in its capital Khartoum and elsewhere. The current internecine fighting began on April 15th between the country's army led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his paramilitary rivals, the Rapid Support Forces or the RSF, led by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, for the control of the resources-rich country of 46 million people. So far, some 500 civilians and others have died as the official army continues to bomb the RSF strongholds in Khartoum, which the paramilitary rivals control. A tenuous truce holds and breaks down in turn, causing a large-scale humanitarian crisis threatening to spill over regionally. Dr. Deepak Vohra, a well-known Africa expert who was India's ambassador to Khartoum between 2005 and 2010 and who has kept up his contacts across the region, strikes a pessimistic note about when the conflict might end and what the end game is. Dr. Vohra, who has advised several prime ministers in Africa, including in Sudan, spoke to Mayank Chhaya Reports from New Delhi about a country that has been mostly at war with itself since its independence on January 1st, 1956. Dr. Deepak Vohra.
You were India's ambassador to Sudan for 5 years from 2005. You've remained engaged rather significantly with the region since then. Describe in broad terms what the current internecine fighting between the country's army led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his paramilitary rival, the Rapid Support Forces, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, mean for the country in the long term?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chhaya. Always a pleasure to be with you on your amazing show. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's true that I was in Sudan for 5 years as India's ambassador, and I must say that I hate to love that country. I absolutely adored the Sudan. It was wonderful. Let me fill you in briefly on the background. What is happening in Sudan is a continuation of a historical process that is still incomplete. The ingredients of history are still fermenting in the vat. Now, it's a very interesting story that Sudan for many years was ruled as a condominium by the British and the Egyptians. The British had captured Egypt, and they said, all right, buddy, let's both of us rule the Sudan. The British ruled, the Egyptians paid the money. And so this is what went on. Prior to that, in the 19th century, the great national hero of Egypt was a character called Muhammad Ali, and he sent his sons to the south. He said, look, buddy, I can't go anymore into the Ottoman regions of the Baltics and so on, or of the Black Sea, but I need Negroes. That's the word he used. I need slaves, I need ivory, I need gold. So let's go clobber the Sudanese and see what we can bring from there. They went and they did all kinds of funny things, and the slave trade, which was already flourishing in Sudan, got a filling. So what the Egyptians do is, as they come south, they catch whoever they can. The fellows who are in the south, they go further south and they catch whoever they can. And then those guys go even deeper and bring out whoever they can. So slavery became a flourishing thing. This continued throughout the period, the colonial period. What was happening really at that point of time was that the British focused their developmental efforts on the north. And they told the guys in the north that you can't go to the south. The south was mainly nature worshipping African religion following people. The north was more Islamic than Muhammad. So the Brits realized, and they told all their church characters, because the goal was CCC, Christianity, Civilization and Commerce. And they were told that, listen, you don't try and convert these characters in the north, otherwise they'll have your livers for breakfast. But what you can do is, we'll stop these Muslim guys going to the south. You go and convert every fellow that you find in the south, make him into a Christian. Mr. Chhaya, this is also what we saw in the remote areas, the remote parts of India, like the northeast, for example. It was handed over to the church. Go save the souls of these wretched fellows and because they were nature worshippers and they had all kinds of beautiful religions. So make them into Christians. You can't do very much with the heartland because these characters won't give up their Hinduism or whatever religions they were following. So this is what basically happened. 1156, Sudan becomes independent. The British were in a tearing hurry to leave because it was becoming extremely difficult to continue to rule that country, especially as Britain was exhausted after the Second World War. So when they leave, civil war had already broken out between the South and the North. The Northern fellows told the South that, look, you have traditionally been slaves. So as soon as we become independent, you'll continue to be slaves. You can come to Khartoum and to the north, and all you'll do is work for us day and night. And the South chap said, go fly a kite, go climb the Qutub Minar. And then they took up arms. So the first civil war started even before Sudan became independent. Now, interestingly, a little anecdote, in April 1955, we had the Bandung Conference,
Yes.
which laid the foundation of the non-aligned movement. By then, elections had been held in Sudan, and the interim prime minister was a fellow called Ismail al-Azhari. I knew his family well. So he showed up and said, all right, buddy, you're more than welcome. We've heard about the Sudan. Where's your flag? We have to put it around the table. He said, I'm not yet independent. I don't have a flag. So Panditji pulled out his handkerchief, wrote Sudan on it, and said, this is their flag. And that's how Sudan became a founding member of the non-aligned. 1156, they become independent. And one of the first things the Sudanese government in the north, in Khartoum, does is gives us 100,000 pounds, British pounds at that time, in recognition of the sacrifices made by sons of India who died fighting in the Sudan against the Italians and the Germans. And in the Commonwealth cemetery in Khartoum, there are many, you'll need Banta Singh, Santa Singh, Santokh Singh, so on and so forth. So they gave us this 100,000 pounds, and we used it to partially construct the Sudan block at the National Defense Academy. So the relationship was very strong, very great. I'm not going back into the trade that was 2,000, 3,000 years old. All that is now history.
Right.
But then what happens is the South has already started fighting the North. And then they turn around and say, buddy, why are we fighting? Let's stop. And you give me some level of autonomy, and I will not do anything to destroy the unity of Sudan. So Sudan says, yeah, you guys take as much autonomy as you want. So the civil war comes to an end. But then suddenly oil is discovered. And it's announced by a character whose name you've probably heard, George Bush Sr., who was then the US ambassador to the United Nations.
Indeed.
When the oil is discovered, the fellows in the north say, buddy, the border between north and south is further to the south. The oil is all with us. South says, like hell it is. It's further to the north. The oil is all with us. And so happy birthday. The war begins again. And this time, off and on, it goes on for 41 years. Longest running civil war in Africa. The Sudanese military is exhausted. You can't go on like this. So what happens is they go to the south, they beat up those fellows. The rainy season comes. The Sudanese are confined to the garrison towns, and the guerrillas come out and take over the countryside and then take pot shots at these guys. So this war goes on and off. It's kind of, I win today, you win tomorrow. I'll take some territory today, you take it back tomorrow kind of thing goes on. Having fought themselves, both sides, to a stalemate, so they sign a peace deal and they tell the South that, look, buddy, in 6 years, you can either stay with us or you can decide to go away. One of the boldest conflict-ending agreements that I have seen in the course of my 72 years as a citizen of this planet and 50 years in diplomacy. Because to tell a part of your country that you have the option to secede requires a lot of bravery, a lot of courage. So at the end of 6 years, the South overwhelmingly votes, buddy, you do what you have to, I'm going. And when they leave, they take 80% of the oil with them. That's a big blow for the Republic of Sudan, and the South becomes the Republic of South Sudan. In the meanwhile, in Western Sudan, you probably heard the name of the place. It's a place called Darfur.
Indeed.
A conflict has started there. And the Sudanese army says, now look, now that we are free of these wretched jokers in the South, let's concentrate on the North. But we are still very tired. So let's outsource the war. So they get hold of these absolute scoundrels, these absolute thugs, butchers, rapists, collectively known as the Janjaweed, some Arab tribes. And they go around messing up Darfur. When I was ambassador, I would have been to Darfur at least 30 times, and the tales we heard, I don't even want to repeat them. So these guys really create havoc over there because they want to suppress the insurgency. Now, who commands the Janjaweed? There is a fellow called Hameti, the fellow you refer to as general, so-called general. He was a cattle herder, Hamadan Dagalo.
Yeah.
And who's commanding the Sudanese military division in Darfur is a general called Abdul Fattah al-Burhan. So they become buddies, best friends forever because they're beating up the Darfur, the rebels in Darfur. Why are they doing it? Well, you could fight the South because those guys are not Muslims, but the chaps in Darfur are 120% Muslim, but then they are African Muslim. They are black. Whereas I, who live in the north, I'm an Arab. Don't you see the fair color of my skin? Don't I look like the Europeans? So this kind of fantasy went on for some time. Now, these two guys got together and really clobbered the Darfuris because the Sudanese government didn't have any money. They told these fellows that, look, you pick up the women, you kidnap the men, the children, you rob, you loot, you plunder, you rape, you do what you want, but it has to be a self-financing operation. Don't ask us for any money. So that went on. And then suddenly the International Criminal Court gets very active and they indict the president, who was a great friend of mine. He'd been around for 30 years, Omar Hassan al-Bashir, self-styled field marshal. They say you're guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and you're guilty of genocide. And they issue arrest warrants for this guy. Now he sort of laughs. The day he was indicted and hundreds of millions of people saw it on CNN live, I was with him in the palace and I was holding his hand and said to him in Arabic, Mr. President, we'll deal with this. You will have to deal with this. I mean, this is not the time to panic. But I must say he was very stoic about it. So things carry on. The Western countries, particularly the United States, intensify the sanctions that they have imposed. And the initial sanctions were imposed because Sudan, in its Islamic fervor, wanting to be the Islamic leader of not just the planet, but of the galaxy, these fellows had harbored Hamas and Abu Nidal and a whole bunch of other nasty fellows. And then also, they had a character whose name you might have heard of. Every American knows him. His name is Osama, son of Laden. So he was also hiding in Sudan. And these sanctions became really intense. As a result of that, Mr. Chhaya, the currency collapsed. From 2 Sudanese pounds to the dollar, it came to about 400 Sudanese pounds to the dollar. Inflation went through the roof, 1,000%. Food was scarce. Medicines were not available. Most of them came from India, but they went underground. The only international product available was Coca-Cola because that was a food supplement. So Coca-Cola was strong enough to get exemption. And then we had, you have a racket in Miami called the Office of Foreign Assets Control. And they wouldn't allow any dollar transaction. Once their mainframe computer saw Sudan dollar, they just seized the money and not even give it back. They wouldn't even say buy or leave. So the situation was really, really terrible. People came out into the streets and started protesting. In 2019, old Hameti and old Al-Burhan get together and say, listen, buddy, this is getting to be bad. We can't go on beating up these civilian protesters. As it is, the International Criminal Court is breathing down our necks. They've indicted Bashir. We don't want to be indicted too. So the two of them shake hands and say, all right, buddy, let's go. So they go into Bashir's palace, arrest the fellow and put him in jail on various charges. And then Bashir says, are you going to hand me over to the International Criminal Court? Because they want me. Listen, you're Sudanese. In any case, you have throat cancer. You are dying. So die quickly so that we don't have to give you to the International Criminal Court. So he goes into jail. And then these two chaps, now this is very interesting, these two chaps decide that they will appoint a civilian prime minister. So Burhan becomes the president, the other character becomes the deputy president, and they have a civilian prime minister. Now, Mr. Chhaya, it's significant and it's important to understand one thing about the Sudan. Since 67 years, in the 67 years of its independence, there have been much longer periods of military rule than of civilian rule. They've had a few periods, but they don't talk of democracy. there's a very clever distinction that the Americans make: civilian rule or democracy. The people of Sudan have never heard of democracy. What they say is, we want stability, we want peace, we want prosperity, and we don't want heavy artillery opening up in our cities and in our streets. We want some kind of security. So every time the military has come, they've actually welcomed it. But then what happens? The military promises elections and then forgets about it. When power and pelf go to one's head, it's an intoxicating combination. So just as Omar Hassan al-Bashir had taken power, I think in 1989, became very Islamic, etc., etc. But then he said, elections, yeah, I think I heard about something about elections. Oh, yeah, maybe I made you a promise. But in Islam, we don't keep our promise. I mean, that's the kind of nonsense he was talking about. And when the trouble was going on in Darfur, I did ask the president, I said, Your Excellency, did you actually say this? He smiled. He's supposed to have said, if one of my Arab soldiers is raping a Darfuri woman, is it an honor for the woman or is it a crime that the man is committing? Because she's an African and he's an Arab. And this kind of nonsense he talked. I asked him bluntly, I said, did you? He didn't answer. So this guy is now in jail. These two characters have a civilian prime minister. They boot him out because he starts telling them, look, I'm the prime minister. You guys, one of you is the army chief. You're only officiating. I'm the regular guy. So at the end of 2 years, they get together and they say, look, the civilians were out protesting in the streets. So we helped them. We threw Bashir out. Now this other fellow, the prime minister, is getting too big for his boots. Let's boot him out. So 21, they boot him out. What happens? The people take to the streets again. But they were flush with the thrill of their victory getting rid of Bashir. Now they say, let's get rid of these two characters. But these two characters don't want to give up. And so they get terribly obdurate and say, no, we're not going anywhere. So they start smashing the heads of the fellows on the streets. Towards the end of 2022, after a quarter century, the US sends an ambassador. And he presents his credentials to Al-Burhan, the army chief, who's also the acting president. And he tells him, and this is a fact, that, buddy, we understand you're going to give the Russians a base on the Red Sea. You do that and see what we do to you. Al-Burhan says, go fly a kite. We'll do what we have to. And he goes ahead with the base. He and the Russian foreign minister announce it jointly. Then the Americans say, we're sending some humanitarian aid to Sudan. So the humanitarian, millions of taxpayer dollars come in. And he gives one final warning. A senior official comes from Khartoum, from Washington to visit Khartoum and says, buddy, you better tell the Russians, I keep confusing it with Soviets, tell the Russians to get lost. And the military says, you get lost. So the humanitarian aid has come in. And soon after this senior official from Washington goes, the so-called rapid support forces attack the military. Are you able to dot the I's and cross the T's? Are you able to see the sequence? That the Russians must under no circumstances get into the Red Sea. And who are these rapid support forces? Stroke of the pen, the Janjaweed, the terrible characters in Darfur. Janjaweed means the warrior on a horse. Suddenly they become legalized as rapid support forces. Absolute illiterate scoundrels. Now these two characters, sir, I know them well. One of them, I think his wife or his daughter came for medical treatment. The other fellow has several members of his family who studied in India. Every Sudanese has somebody in his family who studied in India. There's a lot of goodwill for India. These two chaps are our ambassadors, but they're absolute die-hard bullies. So now they start fighting with each other. And the rapid support forces take over all the military bases. Then the military calls in the Air Force. They go strafing and bombing these chaps. That is what continues. Then the whole world says, now it's time for us to evacuate our people. And so there's some country just outside Europe. It's a part of the European Union. I think it's called the Disunited Kingdom or something like that. And they have an Arab who claims to be the prime minister, some sadhu or sant or rishi or something like that. So this guy then, they send their planes to evacuate their diplomats and officials. The Americans do that, the French do it, the Spanish do it. And all of them say, we've brought back our diplomats and officials. And they crow about it. We decide to go in too. Because Mother India reaches out to help her children in distress. Mr. Chhaya, we bring out our nationals, not our diplomats. That is the strength of Indian diplomacy.
Right.
We coordinate everything. We are sitting in the mission. We open a control. I've done evacuations in the course of my career. I know what it is. Now we have social media, so it becomes a lot easier. We keep a record. We tell everybody, all right, first thing, save yourself. Stay inside your house. Don't pretend to be Rambo. Don't come on the streets. And the Gujarati community there has a very strong mutual support network. So it's kind of calling each other, भाई तेरे घर में खाना खाना नहीं, अच्छा मैं भेज देता हूँ, पानी है नहीं, अच्छा मैं भेज देता हूँ, भाई मेरे पास दवाई नहीं, अच्छा कोई दवाई भेज दो. That kind of thing goes on all the time. So they stay in their homes, and when there is some evidence, and we've been in touch with both sides, both the belligerents, and when there is some evidence that the fighting might be subsiding somewhat, and of course the Saudis and the Americans, oh, we arranged a ceasefire. That ceasefire lasts for all of 20 seconds. But when there are some signs that the fighting is subsiding, then we tell our chaps, get into a bus, put the Indian flag on it, keep in touch with us on you can give us that Google Maps access to your position and we'll follow you. And so the buses move to Port Sudan. In Port Sudan, we've already positioned a ship, an Indian naval ship. And then it takes these people across to Jeddah on the other side of the Red Sea in Saudi Arabia, and from there the Indian Air Force flies them back. So this is what is going on even as we speak today on the 1st of May, 2023 at 1920 Indian Standard Time. This is happening right now. We call it Operation Kaveri. So now you've understood that this conflict is not going to end because these two chaps who are filthy rich both want to control whatever Sudan has of its resources. And what Sudan has is some oil. Most of it went to the south. They have gold. They have rare earths. So both of them want this. They cordially detest each other. William Congreve wrote a poem called The Mourning Bride. Heaven hath no rage like love to hatred turned. This is what is happening to these best friends forever. What is the future? Look, the world can scream and shout and yell. One of them will be defeated. He will be arrested, or he will be exiled, or better still, in the Sudanese system, he'll be killed. The people of Sudan just say, listen, guys, go to the moon, fight it out, and come back and tell us who won, and we'll say, welcome, Mr. President, and you can move into the president's palace. That's the stage at which we are. They're not going to listen to anybody. You might wonder, what about the regional countries?
Oh, no, let me interrupt you a bit here.
Sorry. I was in a monologue. Sorry.
I understand. This is by far the most extraordinary primer I've come across from any of my guests ever. So obviously you know your subject very well. You gave me a perfect segue. I was going to ask you about the region as a whole. Officially, 500 people have died in the fighting so far that began on April 15th. Despite the ceasefire, airstrikes on the capital Khartoum have continued. What is the end game here now?
I'll tell you what it is. Who wants peace there? So if you can sell some more weapons, as in Ukraine, you want peace? No, you don't. Second, let's go to the neighboring countries, just a few of them. Egypt, we love the Sudanese military. We've trained together. We are great buddies, so we'll support them. Saudi Arabia says, listen, buddy Hameti, you sent your chaps to die in Yemen when we attacked the Houthis there. Thank you very much. We love you. The Ethiopians turned around and tell the Sudanese, listen, you conspired with the Egyptians to oppose the great Renaissance Dam, the big dam that is supposed to seal Ethiopia's entry into the brave new world of the rich countries, the biggest dam in Africa. It is now being filled up. They said you opposed it because, Ethiopia is where the Blue Nile begins. Burundi, Rwanda is where the White Nile begins, and the two Niles meet in Khartoum. So the Blue Nile brings about 80% of the water of the combined Nile, which then flows into Egypt. And the Ethiopians said you were opposing all this and you had ganged up with the Egyptians. Now you are having trouble there. Well, may you rot in hell. And then, of course, the Chadians who are on the other side said, listen, you've been messing around in our internal affairs. Now it's our turn to support the rapid support forces because they are own guys, our own chaps from the same tribes. We are going to clobber you. We're going to pay you back. Democratic Congo says, yeah, I've heard of Sudan, but I'm too busy fighting my own battles. I have no time. South Sudan, which had seceded and which has been seeing its own civil war with Khartoum trying to broker ceasefires, now says, listen, buddy, you tried to broker a ceasefire in South Sudan. It didn't work. Now I'll try one in your part in Sudan and hope that it works. And then there's Eritrea. Eritrea just says, look, I'm willing to fight on whichever side, just give me the money. And then, of course, there are the big fellows. There's Russia, which says, we love you, Sudan. Thank you for the naval base. Then there's the United States, which said, don't you dare. We have been so good to you, so kind to you. It doesn't matter if you harbored all these characters. That's all forgiven and forgotten. And you've removed Sharia law, so it's great. And then there's the British who say, you know, we ruled you once. And your problem is not that we ruled you once. Your problem is that we don't rule you anymore. And so all this kind of nonsense is going on. What does the future hold? -0 possibility that the war will subside anytime soon. The undercurrent of hostility is too strong.
You know, the way you're describing the whole system, it sounds almost misanthropic to me. They are just at war with themselves for reasons which are becoming increasingly complex as decades flow and years flow and months flow and days flow.
There's a whole, there are 2 generations of Sudanese who've known nothing but military rule, who've known nothing but civil war. The civil war didn't come to the north, the first one. It was fought exclusively in the south. And whenever I would land at airports in the south, there would be wreckage of Sudanese Air Force planes from the government of Khartoum that had been shot down. And we'd see abandoned tanks, we'd see all kinds of things. It was horrendous, sir. South Sudan, when it became independent, population of 11 million, 9 kilometers of asphalted road in a country 1/6 the size of India. And I had 11 doctors for a population of 11 million. That's the level of destruction that we saw in the southern part of the country. So
You know,
now...
there is an echo for some reason. I don't know why. Do you hear any echo, Dr. Vohra?
No, I don't.
The RSF so far seems to be holding on to Khartoum. One of their main contentions is the demand that they be incorporated into the Sudanese army.
You know, this is a media invention. How do you incorporate a bunch of rebels? How do you incorporate a bunch of rebels into the army? Now, the same thing happened with the Sudan People's Liberation Army of the South. There's an organization in New York, a racket. It's called the United something. It was formed in 1945. United what? Nations. Oh, yeah, United Nations. It's in New York. Is it still alive? I don't know. Anyway, these guys sitting there, these jokers said, okay, now that the civil war in the South is over, now we are going to have a joint integrated army. So the South Sudanese chaps used to tell me, sir, 41 years we've been fighting these wretched Muslim Arabs. How do I get into bed with him suddenly? And these fellows have no idea what human emotions are all about. And that's exactly what is going on. The elite, which is the Khartoum army, the army of the Republic of Sudan, says these rapid support forces, stroke Janjaweed, are a bunch of country bumpkins. They're scoundrels, they're rascals, they have no discipline. We don't want them. How do you integrate them into the military? It's not going to happen. What is going to happen, Mr. Chhaya, I'm sticking my neck out. They're probably going to be an effective division of the country. Yet again. So not a breakup of the country, but an effective, de facto, if not de jure, division. That look, I'm going to be handling these areas, you handle this area, etc., etc. I believe that's going to happen. And the Sudanese are very capable of sorting out their issues if the big powers stay out.
Right.
We have this goodwill.
Isn't that the story forever?
Well, I mean, is the moon made of blue cheese? Yeah, it always happens. And we have this enormous goodwill because we've never participated in internal struggles in any country. Yeah. So we've been in touch with both these characters, and they've promised us that your chaps won't get hurt, and our people haven't got hurt. There was one person who died in a crossfire. But other than that, they've kept their word to us, and they'll continue to do so. So I think this conflict will continue. The people of Sudan, if at all they come into the streets again, they'll catch these 2 characters and say, now listen, buddy, sit down at the table, and you decide who's going to be the boss, you decide who's going to be the deputy boss, but don't trouble us. Try and bring inflation down, try and bring our currency back, open the schools, open the universities, open the hospitals, because we want to get on with our lives. I mean, I have people in Sudan. Mr. Chhaya, one of my closest friends, this is about 10 days ago, he called and he said, Ambassador Deepak, your 31-year-old nephew, his son, was shot and killed. It broke my heart. I loved that kid. He used to come to my house so often, and we'd play badminton, we'd play soccer. I mean, it was great fun. I was told that he died. So there's a lot of human suffering. And the people are saying, now stop. What is our fault? What have we done to deserve this? What we've done to deserve this is that the fermentation in the vat of history is continuing because our identities are not formed. Mr. Chhaya, when I'm in India, somebody asked me, who are you? Well, I'm Indian. I'm a Punjabi. I'm a Hindu in that order. Ask the Sudanese. Well, I'm a Muslim. I'm talking about the Republic. I'm a Muslim. I'm a Shaigia. I'm from this part. I'm from this village, this tribe. Oh, by the way, sorry, I forgot. I'm also Sudanese. That comes at the end. But the national identity has not yet been formed.
Yeah. The way you described the RSF as sort of hiding behind the thin veneer of its history as Janjaweed. But they seem to be in control of Khartoum right now. General
absolutely.
Dagalo has developed interest in the country's gold mines. He has a lot of money, as you pointed out. What are the chances that he would give all that up?
He won't. In 2008, a Darfur rebel group, I think it was called the Justice and Equality Movement, GEM. These characters actually stormed Khartoum. And a lot of Western diplomats, because my residence, India House was in the best part of the city. A lot of embassies were there. And a lot of these Western diplomats came seeking sanctuary in India House. Because they said, we know that these Darfur rebels are not going to attack you. So they said, please fly your flag even higher so that they know it's India, and tell your security guards to keep screaming with megaphones, this is India, this is India, this is India, then they won't come. So we did that. And they protected the president. He was hiding in the basement of his palace 2008 before he was indicted. Because the military takes long to get organized. That's what they claimed.
Right.
The chain of command, etc. But these fellows, Dagalo actually helped Bashir. So Bashir began to depend more and more on Dagalo than he would on his military. Because he had done a coup himself and he thought there may be another one. So this rapid support forces is all nonsense. This is a bunch of absolute thugs. But they've got the money and they've been promised the moon. So they're quite happy.
Yeah. What are the implications of the Sudanese civil war for South Sudan?
Very little. The contact between the two is very limited. South Sudan is in a total mess. Since their independence in July 2011, that's 12 years ago, they've had about, I think 2 million ceasefires. And before the ink is dry, they start fighting again. So, when you have 60 or 100 tribes speaking 60 languages, and the number one, Salva Kiir Mayardit, is a Denka, which, by the way, I am too, an honorary Denka. My Denka name is Marialdit, which means, very funny, big handsome bull. That's the name that they've given me. Well, it's all bull anyway. But they sort of made me into an honorary Denka. And then the other character, Riek Machar, and I know both of them extremely well. They're very close friends. Both have been to India. And the other fellow is a Nuer. That's the second large tribe. So they're clobbering each other. So they come to an agreement and they say, all right, now listen, buddy, we've got a bit of oil and so on and so forth. Although the pipelines go to the north, let's share the proceeds. And then suddenly another little oil field is discovered. And then they say, no, that's yours or mine? He said, no, it's mine. No, it's mine. So they start fighting again. That's basically where we are. So had the South also been left alone through the centuries, they used to fight. They used to make peace. They would intermarry. They would slaughter. They would murder. They'd kiss each other. They'd make up. It was a beautifully choreographed thing throughout their thousands of years of their history. But suddenly the outsiders come and mess it up.
Right. One final thing before I let you go. I would like to talk to you more broadly about Africa at some other point, but since we are on the subject, and given India's long history with Africa, entire leaderships of African countries were trained in India, be they diplomats or students, or it continues till date. Given that
10,000 study every year.
Yeah.
10,000 every year.
Given that kind of goodwill, aren't you troubled that China is loan sharking its way through the continent and we?
I'm glad you've asked me. I'm glad you've asked me this question. What is China investing in the extractive industries? It's building ports so that it can bring all that stuff back home. China's own economy is collapsing. Many Africans now tell us we did a mistake. We put all our cards or apples in the Chinese basket. We shouldn't have done that. We should have listened to you. India has helped in the development of their human resources. China has given them soft loans, but they're not soft because the tenders for those projects, whether it's in Kenya or in Tanzania or in Sudan, South Sudan or in Burkina Faso or in Mauritania, only Chinese companies can participate. So if the cost of the project is $100, 3 Chinese companies will quote. One will quote $1 million, one will quote $500, and one will quote $130. So you go to the 130 chap, but already it's $30 more. You may be paying an interest of 1%, but effectively it's 31%. Because they have front loaded the costs. So this is what they're increasingly seeing. And now, so what really happened was that over the years, the World Bank and the IMF would come to these guys and say, okay, you want money for developmental projects? Yes, we'll give it to you. But there are these 22,464 conditions that you have to fulfill. If you're going to build a road from the president's house to the vice president's house, how is that going to benefit the women of Burkina Faso? This kind of nonsense the World Bank had started imposing as condition. And then along comes this knight in shining armor on a white horse, also known as Dingling or Tingling or Ping Pong or whatever that fellow's name is in China. He comes along and he says, okay, here's my checkbook, buddy. How much do you want? And don't worry about due diligence and all that nonsense. That's a Western concept. So here it is, oh, you want $200 million? Sure. And look, I'm adding 10%, give it to your wife. She can go for shopping to Paris. That's what happens. But now, sir, Robert Merton's law of unintended consequences is kicking in. There are 54 countries, members of the African Union. And I'm told about 40 of them are so heavily in debt to the Chinese that their economies are struggling. They have told Tingling that, buddy, we're not giving back the money. Do what you want. And if you've noticed something, Ping Pong doesn't talk about the Belt and Road Initiative. He doesn't talk about it anymore. Because there's nothing left. It's dead. It's deader than that Mauritian bird called the dodo. The dodo is being revived through genetic engineering, but the Belt and Road Initiative cannot. So that's where we are. The Chinese, let me put it to you, sir, in one sentence, just one sentence. We are respected in Africa. The Chinese are suspected in Africa.